centrally.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes, long ago. Don't worry. Let's do this. That's it. They don't have to see it yet. I just when I come, I just
yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. I just want to be always sure because it happens. Vladimir didn't have to speak his whole presentation without slides.
Yeah, I have a bit of a cough, but I don't have COVID, so I already have it for my sharing, right? Yeah, I'm sharing. So 50 minutes per presentation.
No, it was different.
I think it's because we only have 3 speakers, so it's 20.
20 per presentation.
Yeah, or I think Philippe wanted 25.
Who?
Philippe, the last speaker.
Okay. Okay.
So 20 and the last speaker
20, 25.
Yes.
So when 5 minutes are left, I will present the green card.
That's
It's
okay.
5 minutes, 2 minutes left, yellow, and this time is over. Okay.
Hello, Philippe.
Ok, obrigada. Nós mandaram para cá para
For you, it's 25.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah,
I want to please sign this form. The main stage is all the time being recorded, so we need your consent.
Okay.
Please.
now I'm getting nervous. No, it's fine. It's fine.
Olha, para já está tudo, já tem as águas. Aqui o senhor não tem garrafa. Many thanks. Here. Someone is here, I'll just leave the form.
Yeah, Carina is there. She's there.
I will leave the form and then I will collect after the session.
Well, we all wait until Carina reappears.
Oh, she's here.
Is there a pen there? So, what do we do? Just leave here?
It's a big room, but it's full as a small room, so
Yes.
that's okay.
So welcome. We're starting as we're a little bit late, but I guess that's no problem. So welcome to the Alcohol, No Ordinary Commodity, Alcohol Policies and Brain-Gut Axis Symposium. Well, I'm the only person here, but I really want to acknowledge Jürgen Rehm, who organized this symposium, but sadly catched COVID, so couldn't be here today. And he organized not only this EUFAS symposium, but also the entire EUFAS track at the Lisbon Addictions Conference. So I really want to thank him for that. Yeah, we'll move on to the first speaker, which is Jürgen Rehm, and he will present the new launch of the third version of the book Alcohol, No Ordinary Commodity. Very happy to host you here, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. I will try to walk you through this new version. And basically, obviously, this is a book with many authors, and I'm just speaking on behalf of them. So it is not my presentation, it is our presentation, and we actually shared to make the presentation together. We have a set of presentations for different audiences. So basically, no conflicts of interest to declare. And this is how the book looks like. It will be slightly different because on the back cover, the authors didn't like what the people from Oxford put, so there will be, but you can't read it anyway, so don't worry. And it is basically part of a tradition of different books which have been since Kettle-Brune, and that's the so-called Purple Book. And because the authors couldn't decide together with the Oxford University Press on the cover, we went back to purple again to show our tradition. Then we will emphasize only what is new, because basically this is an audience who is familiar with the book itself, so we just want to say what is new. Well, first of all, we have way better data on low and middle income societies. We have much more emphasis on inequalities. We have harm to others from drinking, which is basically as long as the chapter on harm to the drinker, because it's new. And we have the globalization of the alcohol market and marketing. We have the digital tools and the usual rating system, which is slightly changed. So I'm going through those things one by one. And that is wealth and alcohol attributable deaths per 100,000 people. And what you see here is that the alcohol attributable deaths, of course, are higher in lower middle incomes countries than, for example, in high income countries. Why is that the case? Actually, there were discussions in several of the symposia here. That has three reasons. First of all, it's an alcohol attributable methodology, meaning the methodology will attribute a fraction of a disease or of deaths to these deaths. And very clearly, the overall number of deaths is much higher in lower and lower middle income countries. Secondly, the 1 liter of alcohol is causing so much more deaths because of the risk factor and other environment in countries. In some countries, you have almost no smoking or very little smoking. In some countries, still 40–50% of the people smoke. A lot of the cancers up here, head and neck cancers, are clearly caused by an interaction of alcohol and smoking. And if you take away one of the factors of the interaction, the whole combined effect goes away, and you only have the effect of alcohol or smoking, depending on what you take away. And so these kinds of interactions actually play a role. And the third one, I want to give you the example of tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is caused by alcohol. It is caused by alcohol via the immune system. And very clearly, if you have a heavy drinking event, you weaken all of your immune systems. And if you meet somebody who has the tubercle bacillus in him, close to you, that may lead to infection. So this, however, depends on A, how many people in your environment are TB positive. And this is depending very much on the countries. you have a way higher chance in one of those low-income countries or lower middle-income countries, and you have a way higher chance within those countries if you're poor than if you're rich. And that means that even though the same causality is there, because there's not that many TB cases in, let's say, Austria, because I see somebody from Austria right here, and a lot of TB cases in a country of the same millions in lower income societies, that is why alcohol is causing more tuberculosis incidents and deaths. And I could do the same with a number of other diseases. Harm to the drinker and harm to others, I think it is accepted now, and we do have a number of pretty good publications on alcohol attributable social harms, so it's time to actually bring this topic into not only ANOC, but also into the overall discussion. And the globalization of the alcohol market and marketing is also very clear. I'm just giving you the numbers. No matter how you look at it, for beer and for spirits, the top 5 producers or top 10 producers have the majority of the market share around the world, and this is creating some problems for policymaking because they are omnipresent also in the negotiations with governments, and basically what you see is a lot of interference, and we have seen increases in this interference. We've started monitoring for that, but this is one of the conditions we have to be aware of when we do policy. And to reduce harm from alcohol, which policies and strategies are chosen matters a lot. I'm just giving one example. Lithuania, 1 tax increase. Basically, we had a hefty tax increase, more than 1,000 deaths postponed, meaning they didn't happen in the year after the tax increase, but they were expected to happen from the time series. Fiscal gains, huge fiscal gains, several hundred millions, basically no increase in unrecorded consumption against all predictions, and pretty good reductions in inequalities, which was not supposed to come with taxation, but we can show, based on the census of Lithuania, this is not a small study, a census of Lithuania, that of those 1,000 deaths postponed, we basically have lowered the gap between the rich and the poor measured by education. In the census, we didn't have rich and poor, we just have education as a marker of SES. So that's basically it. And the question is, why are alcohol control policies so important in Europe right now? Well, it's still the highest alcohol consumption in the WHO region and the highest alcohol attributable proportion. Please, that's a difference. It's not the largest number of deaths, as I said, it has the highest alcohol attributable proportion. We have good examples that policies work, recent examples. People, when we came, I don't know, in the last edition, people said, well, taxation no longer works. That was a measure of the last century or the beginning of this century. Now we have quite a lot of good examples, both in the high-income part of European region, i.e. the EU, and in the lower income part. It's still not low income, of course, not low, but like Russia or the Eastern countries. We have better European evidence. We have a number of research projects which have basically studied these cases over the past years. WHO is doing case studies for a number of countries. They will come out, and we have good analysis, and we have showed that the overall taxation can also reduce inequalities, which is one of the main concerns of a number of governments. I think I don't tell a secret that, for example, Belgium is very much concerned with inequalities and has actually asked for what can we do against inequalities in mortality. And people are finally realizing that alcohol causes cancer. Don't know why it took that long, has been known for very long. Just the number of conditions has been increasing, but people haven't known it in the general population. And we've just are doing, for example, one study and doing some eye tracking on labeling. And the psychologist who runs the lab said, "Oh, this is completely new to me." And this is an academic in a university with quite a lot of epidemiology. So ANOC will come with a rating system, and the rating system is having best practices and good practices. And the criteria is high in effectiveness, supported by numerous studies in different parts of the world, capable of reaching the target group, and relatively low in cost. Good practices have less than a maximum of effectiveness and the amount of research support, but nevertheless are a good investment. Usually those practices are cost beneficial. We looked for cost beneficial practices when we did this judgment. So, pricing and taxation, we have discussed 5 policies. 4 were found effective. The one which is best practice is alcohol taxes that decreases affordability. Affordability is key. A lot of those measures and a lot of those arguments were based on pretty lousy taxation examples, to be frank. What has been done is, if you have a taxation, you increase by, let's say, 5%, and inflation at that year is 8%, that means that alcohol is more affordable. And if you take into account then the average income of the people, this can be quite dramatic, and you would not expect this taxation to have an impact. Even with this said, most taxations do have some impact. Of the 140 or so, I think more than 120 were in the right direction and significant. We have good practices, which is minimum unit pricing, differential pricing by beverage, and special taxes on youth-oriented beverages. And we have ineffective policies. We always list ineffective policies as well, are all policies which increase affordability of alcohol and may need additional work on unrecorded, and I don't have the time to go into all of the complexities, but we've done a systematic review on taxation and unrecorded, and the correlation in European samples was basically more or less 0. So yes, we do have good examples where an increase in taxation led to an increase in unrecorded consumption in the region, but we also have examples from Finland, from Denmark, for example, where an increase in taxation has actually led to a decrease in unrecorded, and we still don't know the real mechanisms. I'm just saying that overall, the relationship is not as strong and not as clear as it is currently being described by many groups. What about physical availability? The best practices is limiting hours and places of sale, public welfare-oriented monopoly, and minimum purchase age laws. These are best practices. We have a number of good practices. Basically, all what is decreasing availability in reality will have some effect if the availability reduction is large enough. What do I mean by large enough? I can give you some examples in countries who have been studied in the past 5 years. It could be something like Lithuania, Estonia, or Latvia, where basically alcohol is forbidden off-premise to be sold between 8 o'clock in the evening and 10 o'clock the next morning. Those laws were introduced, and they led to clear decreases in hospitalizations and emergency room visits, and some of those have actually also have also been associated with losses in all-cause mortality. Our main target in this was always to go for all-cause mortality, because sometimes if you only look into alcohol attributable mortality, you have that much of calculations, and some of those calculations are being obscured by new coding practices, like liver cirrhosis. Coding practice in many countries changes every 4 years, and because the insurance is paying this but not this, etc. So all-cause mortality is a very innocent measure, and it's pretty good. I am aware of that. And we basically have restrictions on alcohol marketing, and we have the best practice, a complete ban on marketing, and partial bans are good practices. What is not effective is our industry voluntary self-regulations of marketing, and by now we have very many examples on that. So, drink driving, low BAC levels for young drivers, intensive breath testing, random where possible, and intensive supervision programs. And what has been found ineffective is severe punishment of drunk drivers, designated drink driver programs, very mixed literature, some positive, some negative, pure educational programs. If we look into that as a whole, basically, where did we find no best practices? Education and persuasion, modifying the drinking environment. That would be something like on the Oktoberfest. You know, Bavarians, where I come from, have this strange habit of drinking beer from liter mugs. And the entry stations and emergency rooms during the Oktoberfest, outside of the 2 COVID years, were always completely full. They were over, and they were shipping those injured to other cities. And so what they did is, because people are using those mugs as weapons, and alcohol causes some violence. So basically what has been done is they designed new mugs, which are pseudo-glass, and these mugs are splintering. So if I'm trying to hit somebody over the head with this mug, it splinters. There's still a little injury, but there's not a big injury, and they don't go to the hospitals. And they hoped that overall the hospitals and the serious crisis of hospitalizations during the Oktoberfest would go down. It did go down a little, but it was not enough to call it a best practice. Treatment and early intervention. Very clearly, these are topics which are having success. We do have Cochrane reviews. Alcohol use disorders treatment is better than placebo, but it's not a best practice in terms of the effect size and in terms of the cost effectiveness. So, where do we go from here? Very clearly, and this is my last slide, there will be an English language edition of the book, which will be available on November 29. This is the link, and if people don't want to write it down but want the link, just give me an email, I'll send you the link. It will not be available beforehand. And basically, this link is important because you can download the book for free. We bought the book from Oxford, and we are now allowed to distribute a PDF of the book for free. You can also buy it and support SSA and other organizations who have been supporting us in this book, but basically you don't have to purchase copies, and this is especially important because we have this new emphasis on low and lower middle income countries. So and we are currently working on translations, and there will be two sorts of translations. One will be the overview translations, which will be based on the addiction article, which just came out last month. And we encourage every translation to actually come with a discussion of what's important in this country. I'll close here. My time is up. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Also that the book is available for free as a PDF. That also saves trees. There is time for one or two short questions. And as the lights here are quite, so we can't really see. Oh, excellent. Thanks a lot. So if you do have a question, come up to the microphone. I think your presentation was crystal clear, so taxes and physical availability are still very important. And with the example, yeah, I don't see questions. So with the example of the mugs, actually I thought you were going to say that they designed mugs where a smaller amount of alcohol would be put in. But I think the splintering mugs is also, so that's the, so it was another...
It's still Bavaria.
Still Bavaria, yeah, I know. Yeah, my grandmother came from there, so I've been to the Oktoberfest. Anyway, thanks a lot, Jürgen. And we'll move on to the second speaker, Carina Ferreira-Borges. And she will talk on changes in alcohol policies and its relation to risk perception. Very happy to host you here. Yeah, it's already, yeah, yes. So your presentation is already on there. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, and thank you for inviting us to be here. Very pleased, it's an honor. Thank you, Jürgen, also for setting the stage in terms of what we know of the evidence. I think that throughout this conference we have heard quite a lot of experts talking about evidence in many different areas of addictions, and I invite all of you to look at what we have in terms of evidence on alcohol, because I think it will be very important for the debates that we are seeing on cannabis as well. We've learned quite a lot on tobacco and alcohol, and we continue to learn. The evidence is there, and therefore it is indeed important. I will be talking about changing risk perception on alcohol consumption. And it's very interesting because we had just a panel before this one talking about changes in perception, risk perception for for adolescents using the SPAD data in the example of Norway. And it's an interesting topic, especially when the previous panel was talking about how this risk perception was probably changing. I mean, it was changing in Norway for younger, for adolescents in terms of alcohol, where we saw increases in this risk perception, and then for cannabis, we're seeing the inverse trends. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, let's see if I can start. I'm going to talk about these changes in risk perception, but I would like to start by what Jürgen already has mentioned, which is about the situation in the European region. So just for the record, I coordinate in WHO Regional Office for Europe the area of alcohol, illicit drugs, and prison health. And I declare no conflict of interests. And yeah, so let's talk about where we are in the European region regarding alcohol consumption. So we have seen decreases in per capita consumption, but these decreases are basically explained, as you will see here, by huge decreases in Central and Eastern Europe, and they are the ones that are driving the patterns of decrease in alcohol consumption down in our region. So very important, because we see that there are countries in the region, so we cover 53 countries where we do not see the same trends and the same changes in terms of decreases in consumption. So we have the highest alcohol per capita consumption in the world. This has been said by Jürgen. It is the reality, and we also have the highest burden. The benefits that come with the consumption of alcohol come with an enormous cost to society. We have about 1 million people dying every year due to alcohol consumption, and a major proportion of all those deaths are occurring between 25 and 39 years of old. So you'll see that this comes with a huge cost also in terms of development and economic costs for the society. Again, not an ordinary commodity. It's not an ordinary commodity when we look also at the distribution in terms of mortality and also at the causes of death, attributable deaths from alcohol. And we see the huge burden that we have in terms of cancer-related death. You will see that cancer, in particular for EU countries, comes up as a very important cause of mortality, alcohol-attributable mortality. And it's a little bit about this that I would like to talk about, because it looks like while young people are, very much more aware of some of the risks, there is still many of us, and as you were saying, Jürgen, your expert there did not know, he's working now on labeling, and did not know quite a lot of the evidence that we already have available. And I would like to start by saying that alcohol, ethanol, is a toxic, psychoactive, and dependence-producing substance, and a group 1 carcinogen, like tobacco and asbestos. And this has been known for 30 years. IARC published more than 30 years ago a report talking about the fact that alcohol was a carcinogen, group 1 carcinogen. And still, this seems to be something that as a society we have not yet acknowledged. Alcohol is a major contributor to cancer. It is linked to most prevalent types of cancer that we see today in the world, in particular to cancers like breast cancer and also colorectal cancer. These cancers alone constitute about 40% of all the new cancers diagnosed worldwide in 2018. So we do need a greater public awareness of the relationship between alcohol use and cancer. Why this is important? Because we see that many of the deaths which could be totally preventable are happening, linked to cancer. We have about per year, 180,000 new cancer cases in the European region, and 92,000 people dying from cancer deaths, which are caused by alcohol. So they would not happen if alcohol would not be consumed. So the evidence is clear. We have published some literature on this, and we know that half of the alcohol attributable cancers are not because of heavy drinking. And plus so it is in the majority of the breast cancer. So as you'll see here, most of those alcohol attributable breast cancers in women are not because of heavy drinking, but they are attributable to light and what we would call light and moderate drinking. So very few quantities of alcohol that are consumed and are linked with breast cancer. When we look at the risk equivalency on alcohol and tobacco, and I mentioned, we're talking about, same type 1 carcinogen. When we look at this risk equivalency, we see that for each standard drink, it has the same effect on lifetime mortality as 1 cigarette. So the relationship is very clear, and we can see that risk increases with the quantity that you consume, but the risk is there from the first drink or from the first cigarette. So as a society, we're very good in capturing, for tobacco, but for alcohol, it has been more difficult. What we have seen, however, is that with the time, we have seen governments bringing the evidence into the policy, and we can see that the most recent guidelines, now from Canada, these were the most recent ones that were launched, no more than 2 standard drinks per week are being set as the lowest limit. So you can see that we have a huge variety. Indeed, it is important to inform the population about the overall health risk. Jim was just saying, you know, I'm very happy to talk to you about the risk. Jim, I mean, you really explained it well. Every unit that is consumed comes with a risk, and then governments are bringing the evidence into setting those guidelines that will help people also to understand how important it is to decrease alcohol consumption, exactly because there is those relation. So increasing levels of alcohol use are associated with levels of risk, and risk of illness, risk of mortality, and this leads to the question whether we do have a safe level of alcohol consumption, which could be associated with a zero risk of health consequences, and can we define this? So we know that even in small quantities, alcohol is not good for your health. So I've been, you know, presenting and talking about this, and the greater risks come with the more you drink. Still, if we talk about no risk, this would mean that no risk comes with no drinking. And then you'll see that the low risk comes with drinking, you know, very few drinks. And again, back to Canada, for example, that set the lowest the drinking limits to 2 drinks per week to the low risk. So risk perception is indeed changing, being informed by evidence, not so quickly as we thought it would be. We are hoping that, you know, for today, most of the women would know that alcohol consumption is linked to breast cancer. Unfortunately, that's not the reality. Even for many of the women that are, you know, experts and that are researchers, not necessarily they would be aware of that. And also we know that for the risk perception changes, we do know that words do matter. They do matter, they do have a lot of impact. Those who work on psychology know about neurolinguistics, and they know how it is important the way we talk, because the way we talk convenes, you know, some subliminal messages. So talking into this, you know, words do translate into commitments and into actions, and the member states in the European region have recently adopted the most important document for the member states, which is the European Framework for Action on Alcohol, starting this year and then ending in 2025, which focus on reducing alcohol consumption. Please mind the terminology. It's not focusing on harmful use, because we know that if we think about harmful use, then you would say, oh, there's a non-harmful use. So then, you know, we go again into that debate. So we want to make sure that we have also this understanding that there is this relationship. The more you drink, the higher the risk. There is a risk, and the words that we use do matter also when we are agreeing on documents that will inform the policies at the national level. So the focus of this document is on reducing alcohol consumption and harms. And this has been following a 3-year, very intensive work with the member states, with the civil society, and really important negotiations as well when the document was discussed and adopted at the regional committee in Tel Aviv last September. It was a difficult process, but at the end, I think member states really made it clear that they wanted to have a document informed by evidence, where the wording was also clear and where they wanted to have, you know, a focus also on what would be the key priorities that they would like to see moving forward that have the highest impact in reducing the burden and the mortality which is associated with alcohol consumption. So these areas that were part of the document are the 6 key areas that have been adopted under the framework, and they focus on these best buy areas where we know that we have a lot of evidence and we know it works. So Jürgen has already talked about the pricing and the availability and the marketing, all in the ANOC. We know these are cost-effective areas, and that by doing changes in policies, they do make you know, an important impact. Also, important area is health information with a specific focus on alcohol labeling, because again, it is important for risk perception, like you did for tobacco and the society has done for tobacco, to change the perception of what we are consuming in terms of alcoholic beverages. If this is a carcinogenic a substance which is inside a bottle, it doesn't matter if it is beer, wine, or spirits, then it is important for the consumer also to know about that. We know that there's a lot of resistance on this, but again, this all builds into what has been done when we started changing as a society our perception of the risk regarding to tobacco. Another area is health services response, which is an important component because we know that there are, it's a contact, it's a first contact many times for many people. You go to the doctor, you see your doctor, and it is important to talk also about alcohol consumption and also involving the community and bringing the community also into the changes that we need to have as a society and in the communities, especially talking about those social harms that are so prevalent as well and that we have not been also addressing so much. Just to end my slides, I just wanted to give you an example of the work that we are developing at the regional level, and we have launched this signature initiative. This is the NCD Council, is a council that serves for the regional director of WHO Regional Office for Europe and basically brings experts from different areas that are advising in their advisory capacity to the regional director to bring innovation and accelerated implementation of the knowledge that we know into getting better health of the populations. So we've been working on developing a tax share indicator like exists for tobacco. So there is a tax share for tobacco that has been, is being applied at national level. And this is an important also measure that countries are invited also to put in place to make sure also that, that we follow the same logic and the same evidence that we have for tobacco, for example. So we have been modeling these different scenarios of all-cause mortality, and also we invite you to read a paper has been published on this. So it is an important area of work that we are going to explore more because, as Jürgen was saying, and we've heard a lot from the literature and some of the work that we have been doing on taxation across all the European region, and we will be publishing on alcohol and sugar and sweet and SSB taxation. We will be publishing, where we are in terms of those taxations in countries in the region. And we know that, unfortunately, alcohol has become cheaper in most of the countries in our region. And it is important that countries address this as well if we want to see the burden reduced. And I will end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carina, and for also being perfectly on time. I saw people taking pictures. Are there questions from the audience? There are a couple of microphones. So if you want to discuss shortly, there is time. And otherwise, yeah, there's a question over there. If you can walk to the microphone, please, so everyone can hear you.
Hello, my name is Philippe. I'm a nursing student in the interior of Portugal, and I have some knowledge that there's people saying that red wine is beneficial to the cardiovascular system and have some antioxidants, and we are told that red wine, it's okay to drink one per meal, so that's like more than a high risk. So I wanted to know what's the opinion about that and the evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I love that. What's the opinion? There's many opinions. I mean, you know, there's the opinion also, and it's all about opinions. I mean, but here we deal with evidence, and I'll come to the evidence. The opinion that, for example, if you would drink beer when you were breastfeeding, that would increase also the capacity, you know, to provide more milk to the baby, when we know that, you know, this is highly controversial. So there's many opinions indeed, but what we mind is the evidence. And maybe, Jürgen, you've been studying this quite a lot. I mean, we know that, you know, there is many theories about the benefits of alcohol, but the evidence is clear also to show that many of the studies that were done did not take into account certain factors. And maybe, Jürgen, you want to go for the specificity, because you explained this very nicely, and Jürgen will give you a little bit more of the in-depth of the difficulties of, you know, having good, you know, informing those opinions.
Thanks a lot. First of all, I would like to point out three things. First, when we go into those analyses, or for example, at the basis of those low-risk drinking guidelines in those countries, are analyses which basically look into what happens over a lifetime if you drink 1 drink, 2 drinks, 3 drinks per day. In those analyses, it is taken into consideration that there is a slight protective effect on ischemic heart disease. But still, the overall is way more. That is why if alcohol was only detrimental, we would say 0, 0, 0, like in tobacco. As alcohol is more complicated, those analyses come to reasoning like up to 2 per week or whatever quantity. And what does that mean for individuals? Very clearly, it means if you drink at a very low level, your risk is not that high, and there are potential benefits. I'm not going to go into the controversy about those potential benefits, but in all of those models which had been presented here, the benefits were included. So what you should do is, let's say you really want to drink only for health reasons, which most people don't, but let's say you want to drink only for health reasons, then you should stick at a very low level. If your family has a lot of cancer risks, it may be better to consider quitting drinking. If your family has a lot of cardiovascular risks, you may stick at that low level. The full effect of cardioprotection, according to the analysis of Cricky, can be obtained by 1 drink every other day. Okay? 1 drink every other day, but you cannot accumulate your drinks. You cannot wait 5 days without drinking and then drink 5 drinks. That is not beneficial for the cardiovascular system. It's actually detrimental. You have to drink, because of the blood thinning properties, you have to drink 1 drink any other day. And frankly, I don't think anybody in this room is claiming that he or she drinks 1 drink every other day or drinking for health reasons. People drink for different reasons. I hope this answers your question.
Just to complement also, one thing that Jürgen did not mention is, again, you know, he talked about heart diseases, but I think it's important also to note that it's not just about that. It's, you know, by thinking about heart diseases, then you are not thinking about, you know, the risk for cancer, for example. So if we know that there is a risk for cancer from the first drink, I mean, you know, you would be choosing, okay, you know, I want to live longer from, you know, not having heart diseases, but then, you know, maybe you would. So I think this is also something that needs to be considered. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question and for the discussion. I think we could easily fill a whole symposium or conference on this topic, but we won't, so we'll stop the discussion here. Thanks a lot for your very clear presentation, Carina. And we'll move on to the third speaker, who is Philippe de Timary, and he will talk about gut-brain axis and alcohol. And after Philippe de Timary's presentation, I will wrap up this session with the EUFAS European Addiction Research Award announcements. So I saw it was not updated in the app, so please stay seated for that. But before that, Philippe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, the EUFAS, for inviting me. Thank you also to Jürgen Bramnes, who's not here, but who has asked me to come to do that presentation, where I will talk about the gut-brain axis. But as you will see, I will insist on that gut microbiota could have a specific impact on socialization and socialization impairments. So alcohol use disorders, we know a lot about that. We know how important it is, how frequent it is, and but main targets of approaches in alcohol use disorders have been related up to now for medications to neurotransmitter systems, where the medications that have been tried with that are only of moderate efficacy, and the idea is that we could maybe question whether there are some different targets within the body, and in particular the gut microbiota, where, for instance, through nutritional intervention, there could be some improvements. Oh, I see that. So what is the gut microbiota? It's a large body of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and yeast that are present within our body, with a number that is 100,000 billions of bacteria, the number which is over the number of our total human cells that we have within the body. The idea is also that everyone has a specific microbial composition that is unique to himself, and like a digit print, and that there are some important aspects that are related to this gut microbiota. And the idea is that the gut could communicate with the brain, and there are several pathways that have been alluded to and proposed to be important for this gut-brain communication. One being the microbial metabolites that are produced within the gut that will pass into the circulation and have an effect on the brain. The other one being the inflammation, for instance, through the passage through the gut barrier, where gut products, where bacterial products will lead to the generation of an inflammatory reaction that will also have an influence on the brain. And finally, the vagus nerve may also be of importance. In this presentation, I will give you some evidence on the fact that this gut microbiota could be important in alcohol use disorder, but probably only in a subpopulation of these patients. And I will start with the first study where, in that study, we tested alcohol use disorder patients at the beginning and at the end of detoxification. We tested their intestinal permeability, and we then measured and analyzed the gut microbiota composition by various sequencing techniques, and also we did some metabolomics analysis of volatile organic compounds to see how these may be related to the gut permeability. And in fact, I will really sum up that study. What we observed that about half, or a little more, less than half of the population of alcohol use disorder patients presented with an increase in in gut permeability that is presented in red there, alcohol use disorder patient with high intestinal permeability. And what we observe at the beginning of alcohol withdrawal is that that population that present with an increased intestinal permeability do not have larger symptoms expression than those that present with a normal intestinal permeability. Then, when we test them at the end of alcohol use of detoxification, what we observe is that there is a difference, meaning that those with increased intestinal permeability present with higher scores of severity for alcohol use disorder and probably more risk of relapse afterwards. And this can be shown by this nice correlation between the intestinal permeability tested at the beginning of withdrawal and the signs of depression, anxiety, and craving at the end of detoxification. Then when we compare the composition of the gut microbiota, what you may see is that there is a kind of overlap between the composition of the people presented with a normal gut permeability and the control people. I mean, there is practically no differences in the composition of the gut microbiota. While when you take those with increased intestinal permeability, these are really totally different. And we look, for instance, at some families of bacteria like Rhamnococcacea or Lactobacillus, you see that there are clear distinctions between these high permeability populations and either the controls or the low permeability population of alcohol use disorder patients. And when we look in more detail, we see that there is a 10 times decrease in the total number of bacteria that is related to a decrease in the bifidobacteria that are known to be probiotics with positive effects on the body, and a specifically high decrease in the percentage of, in the quantity of Faecalibacterium prosnitzi, which is decreased by 1,000 to 10,000 times compared to the others. And this bacteria is very important because it has very important anti-inflammatory properties, and this bacteria, for instance, is largely decreased in inflammatory bowel disorders, and where it seems to play a very important role. And this we find also in that subpopulation of alcohol use disorder patients. But what I will show next is that there are also some differences that are related to sociability. We use the emotional intelligence questionnaires to see whether there were differences between alcohol use disorder patient and control patient. What you can see is that there is a large decrease in the scores of emotional intelligence that may be seen as decreases in well-being, self-control, emotionality, and sociability. But among all these different dimensions, only the criterion of sociability was negatively related to the intestinal permeability, meaning that people that present with increased intestinal permeability are also those that present with lower scores of sociability. Then, if we want to summarize all these data, what we see is that in alcohol use disorders, the drinking in a subpopulation of the patients is related to alteration of the gut microbiota. These changes in the composition of the gut microbiota will lead, in some patients, in an increase in intestinal permeability that will be related to the leakage of some bacterial products like lipopolysaccharides or peptidoglycans. And these bacterial products will get into the circulation and activate the immune system, and this activation will lead to some effect at the level of the brain and will be related to the expression of symptoms of alcohol use disorder like depressive anxiety and alcohol craving. But what is also very important is that these changes in the gut microbiota and gut permeability will also be related to the sociability dimension. But then to test in a different manner how this sociability dimension may be related to the gut microbiota and to test the causality of the effect of the gut microbiota. What we did is pass through an animal model where we wanted to test both the effect of the gut microbiota on the brain function and on behavior. In the first part of the description of that study, I will really focus on the behavior. So the idea was to test the causal role of the development of behavioral alterations associated with alcohol dependence and whether these are related to the gut microbe by doing a fecal transplantation of the feces of alcohol use disorder patient to the mice. To do so, what we did is treat the mice with antibiotics for a while and then do fecal transplantation to these antibiotic-treated animals. And what we treated them either with the feces of alcohol use disorder patients or with the feces of control subjects. And then in the mice, we tested the behavior, and then later on I will show you that we also tested some elements at the level of the brain. And what we could observe is that this is related to changes in social behavior. This is the three-chamber test. In this test, the mouse is freely exploring three zones of a box where in the right part of the box, which is called the mouse chamber, into a small cage, there is another mice. You can see the tail of that mice moving, and normally the animal has a pro-social dimension, meaning that it will spend more time within that mouse chamber than in the other chamber. And this is the case when we take the animals that have been transplanted with feces from the control subject. But then when we turn to the feces, to animals that have been transplanted with the feces of alcohol use disorder patients, we see that there is no preference anymore for the social dimension, meaning that there is a reduced sociability in AD recipient mice. Then we did another experiment in which we tested depression-like behavior using the 4-string test. This test is used to try to evaluate in animal this depression dimension, and you can see that on the animal on the left, it is moving a lot while put into that bucket of water. And what we observe in the animal on the right is that the movement is much lower, and in fact, this mobility and the latency to immobility is a marker of depression-like behavior in animals. And what we see is that the latency to immobility in animals that have been transplanted with the feces of alcohol use disorder patient, this latency is reduced, meaning that there is an increased depression-like behavior in AD recipient mice. What I want to add is when we measure corticosterones also in these animals, there is a rise in corticosterone, meaning that even the stress system is activated related to the gut microbiota. So the interim conclusion is that the gut microbiota in AUD patients may play a causal role in the induction of some of the AUD symptoms, including a decrease in social proneness. Then we move to the third study before we go back to the second study. In this third study, we wanted to test the effect of a nutritional intervention using inulin, but due to lack of time, I will not have time to develop that aspect. But what I will do is rather insist on the dimensions that are related to the effects of the gut microbiota on psychological symptoms sociability in this psychological dimension. In fact, what we do is only, what I will show you is only the results that are measured at time 1, before the intervention with inulin. We may discuss the question of inulin later, but I will only, because this is on that point that I will show the comparison between at the level of these sociability dimensions. But before doing that, we also did some dietary measurements, and what we see in these dietary measurements is that there is an overall decrease of non-alcoholic intakes in proportion in actively drinking alcohol use disorder patients when compared to control subjects, which is not a surprise in itself. But what we could also see is that there is a large decrease in the amount of fibers that are ingested in alcohol use disorder patients, and we know that fibers are related to the composition of the gut microbiota and might play a role at that level. And so we see that there is a decrease in total fiber, in insoluble fiber and insoluble fiber, meaning that all types of fibers are decreased in alcohol use disorder patients. So this means that maybe nutritional intervention might be worth testing in that population of patients. And when we look at the relationship between these soluble, insoluble, and total fibers in this population of patients, we can see that there was a negative relationship between the quantity of fibers and, again, the sociability dimension and also the anxiety dimension. So when we analyze, then what we did next is sequence the gut microbiota, and we again observed two different subpopulations of patients, one presenting with a normal non-dysbiotic composition of the gut microbiota, and the other one presenting with dysbiotic elements. This was 16 compared to 30. But what we have observed is that in dysbiotic patients, I mean, these dysbiotic patients were younger, a little thinner, had a higher craving score at the beginning of withdrawal, and presented again with lower sociability scores. And we also observed that there was an increase in the level of some inflammatory markers as the IL-8. But then, in that population of patients, we also decided to test the question of their sociability dimension with the support of sociologists, a team from our university, and we used what we call the sociogram. Sociogram is a way to measure. I mean, we come with this kind of drawing in front of the patient, and we ask the patient to draw who are the persons that are really supportive to him in the daily life, and we measure the number of persons in each circle, and we ask him on the relationship between these people, whether these people interact with one another in giving their help. And this can lead to several indexes, and what we could observe is that in the dysbiotic population, there was a decrease in the network size, in the number of communities, and in several factors that are related to the connectedness of their social network. And so there is a real relationship between being dysbiotic and presenting with a less rich and less connected network among the patient. And then we wanted to go one step further and question the question of their ability for social cognition. And for that, we use what we call the visual perspective task, which is a task that has been developed by some colleagues of ours. And in that task, what we are testing is that we are asking to the person who's watching the task to tell what he sees on the screen, knowing that there is an avatar within the screen that is looking in one direction or the other. And the idea is that we test with that what we call the egocentric bias. The egocentric bias in that case, where you see that there is one red disc that is presented in the back of the avatar, and when we ask what the avatar sees, the answer is the answer should be he sees no disc, zero disc, but there may be some erroneous response showing that he sees one disc, which means that there is an egocentric bias, or there might be a slowing down in the treatment of the response, and both elements will be related to egocentric bias. Alternatively, there can be an altercentric bias, which means that you put yourself too much into the position of the avatar that you see on the screen. And then when we ask the person, do you see one red disc? he might say an erroneous response because he takes too much the perspective of the other into consideration, or there is slowing down, meaning that there is again a tendency to treat the information that the avatar is having. And this will lead to the alter-centering bias. Now, what we see when we observe what is going on with these dysbiotic and non-dysbiotic subpopulation of patients, what we observe is that in AUD patients, where we had 16 dysbiotic patients and 30 non-dysbiotic patients, what we observe is that first there is a, I don't know if it's working. No, sorry. What we see is that on the left panel, what we see is that there is a decrease, an increased egocentric bias that is presented in the dysbiotic subpopulation, and there is a total disappearance of the alter-centric bias as measured by the rapidity of the response. Considering the number of errors, we see that there is no difference at the egocentric bias level, but there is a total disappearance of the alter-centric bias, meaning that among AUD patients, the alter-centric bias is absent only in the dysbiotic population, meaning that these dysbiotic populations are really having a difficulty to put themselves into the position of the other and to take into perspective the position and the other. And we believe that this is probably related to why they are so lonely and with such a smaller sociogram characteristics. So these interim conclusions, second, is that several studies support that there are some deficits in the perspective taking in AUD patients, and that is related to lack of paying attention to others. Here we show that this difficulty to pay attention to the others is related to abnormal gut microbiota, meaning that maybe the social brain is located a little lower than expected, and but this is supported also by other consideration for other studies, meaning that microbiota might be related to the social brain. Then I come back to the second study, where we had considered the behavioral elements that were related to the transplantation of the feces from the patient to the mice. But now we will look at what is happening at the brain level in these animals, and both at the frontal cortex or at the striatum level. And we will be specifically interested into myelination genes, into genes coding for GABA-glutamate neurotransmission, and inflammatory and microglial activation. And what we could observe is that there was a decrease in myelination in these patients that in the mice that received the feces from alcoholic patients, and that there was also an important modification in the expression of GABA and glutamate receptors, both essentially at the frontal level, but also a little at the striatal level. Regarding inflammation, the difference was mainly happening at the level of the striatum, and among these inflammatory genes, one is important, which is the GPR109A, which is a microglial gene. And this microglial gene is, in fact, what is interesting is that this microglial gene is a gene that is coding for a receptor to beta-hydroxybutyrate, and I will soon talk about this compound. So the question is, what is driving the alterations in myelination, neurotransmission, and neuroinflammation at the brain level? One of the possibilities that the inflammation could be the case, but when we measured the inflammation in these animals, in the blood of these animals transplanted with the feces, there were no differences between the animals that were transplanted with the feces of alcoholic patients or with the feces of the animals that were transplanted with the feces of control subjects. But then we went to the metabolites elements, and what we could observe is that there were important differences on the metabolic profiles, showing that there are complete distinctions between the animals that were transplanted with the control, the feces of control recipients, when compared to those that were transplanted with the feces of alcoholic patients. So these differences, the metabolite composition, when we looked at some, when we looked further into that, we observed that there was a large increase, a large difference at the level of beta-hydroxybutyrate. Beta-hydroxybutyrate was decrease in the AD recipient mice and not when compared to the control recipient mice. Now, how is beta-hydroxybutyrate generated? In fact, it is a ketone body that is produced by the liver under fasting condition and low glycemia, or under prolonged exercise. And so what is, for the ketogenesis to happen, what needs to be done is that there should be a degradation from liberation of free fatty acid from the adipose tissue that will come to the liver, and then this will lead to the generation of beta-hydroxybutyrate. What you may see on the left panel over there is that in the animals that had been transplanted with the feces of alcohol disorder patient, the fat mass was increased, and the size of the adipocytes was increased, suggesting that this could be important. Then so there is probably something happening at that level, but what is important is that BHB may be a source of energy for the brain, has been shown to play a role in depression and social behavior, has anti-inflammatory effects, and serves as a glycosphingolipid synthesis and the regulation of the GABA-glutamate balance. So this may be finally explaining most of the changes that we observe at the brain level. Then I have soon finished, but what the problem we have is that we know that there is a difference at the gut microbiota and that there is something happening at the liver level, but we don't know what could be the communication between the two. And to test that, we measured what was happening at the level of the portal vein and which would be the metabolites that could explain how the liver is changing. And what we observed as the largest difference was the ethanol. Ethanol was increased in the portal vein of the mice that had been transplanted with the feces of alcohol use disorder. These mice had never been exposed to ethanol. It was a spontaneous synthesis of ethanol, probably from glucose. So to summarize this, in fact, what we believe is that by doing this transplantation, we observe a dysbiosis in these mice with modification of several bacteria, which are bacteria that are both sensitive to ethanol and then can produce ethanol. So these bacteria are feeding with ethanol and can produce ethanol. But what is happening is that due to the production of ethanol locally, there is probably an inhibition of the production of beta-hydroxybutyrate, which will lead to brain changes, which will lead to behavioral differences that will lead the person to drink the ethanol, and drinking the ethanol will somehow feed the bacteria that are present within the gut, meaning that somehow these people might be directed to their behavior through the bacteria from their gut. I thank you for your attention. These are the people who have done all the studies.
Thank you, Philippe, for a very exciting presentation with all these novel results. We have time for a few short questions. I see someone there, or Jürgen has a question, and there's a question from the audience. Or no, it's the cameraman. I'm sorry. Yeah. So Jürgen, the floor is yours for a short question. Yeah.
I have a short question. When you measure the social network, obviously this has also to do with hierarchies. Socially higher persons have more supporting network, have more people working for them, etc. Was that controlled for or not?
In fact, the question was, who are the people who are involved in helping you? Because they were all patients that were hospitalized, and the question were, the density of the network of supportive persons. So it would not really question this question of hierarchy, but we will dig probably further into understanding what is the meaning of these social differences in these people.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting. There's a question over there. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ines Enriquez Cadvi from the University of Manchester. I had a couple of questions. One that's possibly similar to Jürgen's question, which has to do with how does this relate to the alcohol harm paradox, the fact that people that are more deprived tend to suffer higher harms at the same level of consumption of alcohol. And have you explored the fact that could it be that they have less opportunities to maybe replace gut bacteria and therefore have lower levels of the good bacteria that could influence this?
So one of the ideas would be to modify the composition of the gut microbiota. What we have tried now was with the inulin to try to modify the composition of the gut microbiota, but we only did a small exposure period where the effects of the prebiotic, of the inulin, was only limited on the composition of the gut microbiota, and there was small difference, but the only difference that we observed using this approach was at the socialization questionnaire, where they said that they were more willing to get into contact with the others than those that did not receive the prebiotic, meaning that it could have some effect, but this should be done on a longer period to be sure that this really makes a big difference.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, you can ask a last question.
Very quickly, if there was any difference in the severity of the alcohol use disorder and the length of period they had been suffering from it in the kind of leaky gut experiment?
In fact, regarding the leaky gut, there were no difference in the amount of alcohol that was drunk. We did the timeline follow back to have an evaluation of the quantity of alcohol that was drunk. There were no differences at that level. So the main difference in our view was at the level of the symptoms expression and at the level of the socialization dimension. But there were no difference in terms of quantity of ethanol, and this leads us to believe that it's not only the ethanol that is playing the role, but it's really the gut micro. But one of the questions we had is whether this could be, for instance, being exposed, a consequence of being exposed to traumatogenic experiences. But when we tested that, we didn't observe any differences at that level. What we are going to do next is test the question of childhood maltreatment to see whether this will somehow could influence the composition of the gut microbiota and maybe orient both the socialization dimension and the symptoms expression.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks again, Philippe, for a wonderful talk. And with that, I'm going to close this EUFAS symposium with the announcement of the EUFAS European Addiction Research Award 2022. So it's an announcement. So the award is given to John Marsden. Unfortunately, he had to travel back, so he's not here personally, so it's an award announcement. Well, you all know him, a professor in addiction psychology at the Institute of Psychiatry at King's College London. He's the chief editor, editor-in-chief for addiction, and he's awarded the 2022 award for his tremendous work in the development and evaluation of both pharmacological and psychological therapies for substance use disorders and health epidemiology, and as well as psychometrics. And especially also for his recent work and ongoing work in RCTs in treatment-resistant opiate use disorder. And John will hopefully give a speech or an award talk at the Biarritz ATHS conference next year. And if you want to know more about that, Benjamin Roland of the EUFAS can tell you all about that. And with that, I want to thank all the speakers, and I also want to thank again Jürgen Bramnes of EUFAS for organizing not only this symposium, but also the EUFAS track at the Lisbon Addictions Conference, and wish you all a very inspiring rest of today's conference. Thank you all for your attention.